Miami's got some dudes out there, and Markel Bell headlines my list of training camp risers.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Postgame on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On this Locked On Canes, we'll talk about Sisi Mauigoa because Miami's starting right tackle has made Bruce Feldman's freak list. Maybe a couple of other players Feldman could have put on the list that he didn't. We'll discuss Miami's depth, but let's start with training camp risers. All right, guys, we're now officially 6 practices in the books. We're not even in full pads just yet. They've been practicing in shells for the last few practices, but the physicality has been ramping up. And you all know we're counting down until August 31st, that big opening game against Notre Dame. And, first of these players that really stands out to me as a riser, and this one's not really a secret, right? Miami fans already know because he's the starting left tackle. But I wanted to start with Markel Bell, who's heading into his first full season as a full-time Miami Hurricanes starter with his 6'9", 340-ish pound frame. And I wanted to bring up Markel Bell as a riser for a couple of reasons. You go back to, remember a few weeks ago when I had my one-on-one interview with Mario Cristobal at ACC Media Days, Mario told me Markel Bell is, in his eyes, the most improved player on the team going back to last year. And what stood out today, day 6 for Markel, excellent reps against Ruben Hurricane Bain. The two of them had been battling. And for those wondering, Bain is practicing really well, and I think he's in store for a bounce-back year. But Bell and Bain have had some good battles. And Ruben Bain told us last week after the first practice that he's still figuring out how to get around Markel Bell with that big wingspan that comes with that 6'9" frame, that he uses his arms and uses his body really well. So, I know, and rightfully so, Sisi on the right side is the one who gets all the accolades and the preseason praise, and he's on all the watch lists. But locally, Miami fans, we're not sleeping on Markel Bell, but nationally, people are. And I think Miami's starting left tackle is in store for a big year this year. He's been practicing really well. Another riser that I think is important to bring up is Alex Bowman at tight end. Tulane transfer, has shown he's a really reliable route runner, solid blocker, and he's practicing really well so far. And I think in the case of Alex Bowman, he's going to be the perfect complement to Elijah Lofton, who we expect to be Miami's tight end one and Miami's number one weapon, right? Because Lofton can do so many things. He's got so much versatility. But Bowman is more of the traditional tight end, and he's getting separation from kind of the rest of that group after tight end 2. And I think Bowman is going to be a red zone weapon and potentially a big time, 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdown scorer. I think he had 7 touchdowns this past season at Tulane. So he's been a riser. Another riser who had a good practice on Wednesday and has practiced well that I don't talk about nearly enough is Herbert Scroggins III. Part of that deep edge rusher rotation at the U. Had some excellent reps in Wednesday's practice. This is someone who should not be forgotten when it comes to the collection of young, talented pass rushers. Because, Miami's got Ruben Bain, who's looking really good. Miami's got Akeem Mesidor. The two of them will probably be the starters on the edges, but Miami's 2-3 deep at those position groups on the edge. And I think Jason Taylor is doing a nice job developing these guys. And I think Third Scroggins, which is his nickname, Herbert Scroggins the third, he goes by Third. Watch out for him getting some reps on the field this year. I do spend a lot of time here on Locked On Canes talking about the freshmen because some of them are excelling. But here's one that's worth bringing up again because he continues to practice well, and that's Kellen Wiley Jr. at linebacker. I think he's flashed in every single practice so far. 6'4", 242-pounder. He plays physically, looks good going up against the run in some of the drills that they've been having. And, Wiley, linebackers got some guys. Mohamed Toure, of course, has been like the highlight reel transfer. He's practiced really well. Wesley Basaint is one of the leaders on that team and should start this year. Popo Aguirre, Bobby Pruitt are more experienced guys, but would not surprise me if Wiley is able to earn his way into that linebacker rotation this year. I think he's been really impressive. And even if he doesn't this year, his time will come because Kellen Wiley looks really good, and he's got the sort of size and physicality that cannot really be developed. It's God-given. I mean, he certainly works really hard at his craft, but he's got a certain God-given talent that is unique and rare. A couple of other players on the defensive side who have been rising, in my opinion, Jacoby Thomas and Dylan Day at safety. And they might be competing for the same starting safety job. There's going to be a rotation there, so I think they're both going to play. But they've looked really good. Dylan Day, we already know because he's a homegrown talent, a guy Miami recruited out of high school a couple of years ago, whereas Jacoby Thomas transferred in from the Tennessee Volunteers. And he transferred to Miami despite the fact that he was in line to be a starter for Tennessee, and yet he chose to take his talents down to Coral Gables. Jacoby Thomas, he looks really physical out there, had some good competitive reps against Elijah Lofton at tight end, and he's playing physical even before the pads come on. So again, once the full pads are on, we're going to see even more truths being told out there. But so far, Jacoby Thomas has looked the part. Safety with Zechariah Poyser, who's looked good. He's put on some size. We talked to Poyser at Miami Media Days last week. He's looking to become even more physical. Jacoby Thomas looks physical. Dylan Day has played physical so far. Markeith Williams is going to be part of that safety rotation this year. Miami's got some young guys like Amari Wallace, who's been getting some work. So we'll see what happens at the safety position. I know it's not considered to be one of the deeper spots for the Hurricanes, but we'll see if some young depth can develop at those spots. So, and I will offer this note, right? When I bring up certain players that I feel are rising out there on the practice field, this is not me saying, hey, those are the only guys that are playing well. No, we're going to talk more about Carson Beck, who continues to shine. Miami's running back room. Jordan Lyle had a very good practice on Wednesday. I think he's worth continually talking about. Miami's running back rotation is in really good shape. Josh Moore, freshman wide receiver, continues to stand out in drills. He's got a lot of poise and technique for someone so young as a true freshman. So, yeah, the guys I mentioned aren't the only ones doing well, but I think these are players that have been rising throughout the early days of training camp. When we come back, I'm going to answer questions from you guys, the Locked On Canes insiders. If you want to become an insider, click the link in the show description below. Try it free for 14 days. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours, breaking news, recruiting updates, show updates, practice updates, one-on-one questions and answers. Try it free for 14 days. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. I got a good question about Miami's depth. Which areas do they have strong depth? Which areas not so much? And on the progress of Carson Beck. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new Locked On Canes. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Guys, I've just budgeted so much better since I started using Monarch several months ago. They send me notifications when a subscription order or a big purchase comes in. It consolidates all of my financial information, so I don't have to go through like a dozen different apps to check all of my accounts and my credit cards. And Monarch made me realize how much I was spending and overspending on, things like streaming services and food delivery. So you want to take control of your finances like I did with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. For your next listen, check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I take you around the conference, all the big storylines, all the football previews with the season coming up, available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. All right, so a question from Gary, a Locked On Canes insider. He's got a two-part question. He wants to know, hey, is Ray Joseph getting starting reps, and is Carson Beck starting to be more accurate? Well, on Carson Beck, he's been accurate. I mean, at no point, during the first couple of practices last week did I think, I'm not so sure about Beck. Beck's arm has been live, and he's looked like a legit quarterback one with NFL upside. Maybe if what you're asking about is he becoming more accurate. So, last Thursday was the first official practice. And, Beck, he missed the spring when he was recovering from the elbow surgery. He did off-season workouts to play or run practices, but last Thursday was his first official practice in a Miami uniform. And he told us his arm was a little too juiced, in the early drills, but that he settled in, kind of found his touch. And that's my observation matches up. So, not only has Beck been accurate, but he has shown his authority over the offense. You see the autonomy that he has, courtesy of offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson, to be able to audible, to be able to improvise and really put his fingerprints on Miami's offense, which was obviously what Cam Ward was allowed to do last year. So I think Carson Beck is in a good situation at Miami. The offensive line is going to keep him protected. It's really going to depend on how, Miami's young receivers and how the new transfer guys, can really help him out. And we've seen some good play from receivers in training camp. But again, training camp is camp. It's different than when you go out there against Notre Dame. So Beck has been very good and accurate, to answer your question. In terms of, receivers and starters reps, I can tell you quite honestly, there have been at least 3 slot receivers who are getting prominent reps. Obviously, Ray Joseph is one of them, and he's practiced well. It looks like he's out there motivated. He's competing. Tony Johnson, the transfer from Cincinnati, has had some good moments. And Malachi Toney, we talked about this on Monday. Remember Peter Ariz with us talking about Malachi. Malachi Toney is practicing really well. So I don't really think you're replacing Xavier Restrepo with one guy. I think all 3 of these guys are going to get some playing time, but we know how important slot receiver is in Shannon Dawson's offense. I mean, think about the numbers that Tank Dell put up in this offense in Houston, the numbers Xavier Restrepo put up the last couple of years at Miami. So, I don't know which of those 3 is going to emerge to get the most playing time, but I think that Tony Johnson, Ray Joseph, and Malachi Toney are all going to eat this year. I appreciate the question, Gary. We get one from our guy, D Lane, who says, hey, how do you feel about our schedule now that the coaches poll has been released? I feel like we got a little love, and so did some of the teams that we're going to be playing. Yeah, so obviously if you talk about getting some love, Miami at number 10 was a little higher than I thought. I don't have the same conspiracy that some of you guys have, thinking they just want to set Miami up so Notre Dame can beat a top 10 team week 1. That wouldn't be the coaches poll. If you're going to get manipulation like that, that would be the AP poll, because those writers get clicks and income based on spicier matchups. But that's not the case for the coaches. The coaches who vote on this do it on a volunteer basis. They don't profit from any sort of manipulation. So they legitimately think, do the coaches, that Miami has a top 10 roster. And I think we should take some pride in that they're recognizing how good Miami can be. But and you open up the season against number 5, Notre Dame. Clemson is number 6. We don't face them in the regular season, but if Miami does get to the ACC championship game, Clemson's going to be a very tough matchup. SMU on the road, they're on Miami's schedule this year. They rank 16th in the country. Florida at home is on Miami's schedule. They rank 17th. So, a lot of folks will bring it up. Hey, The Gator fans always bring this up. Miami didn't beat a single ranked team last year, even though, their Gators lost to Miami 41-17. They still like to bring it up. Miami didn't beat a ranked team last year. Well, you're going to have several opportunities this year. The schedule is much tougher on paper than it was a year ago. Several opportunities to beat ranked teams. So, yeah, D-Lane, this schedule sets up for Miami. If Miami wins, 10, 11 games, you have a really good shot at getting into the college football playoff, as long as you at least get into the ACC championship game. So the coaches poll did us some favors. We get this one from Cat 5 Kane, who says, Yo, Donno, which position group do you think has the best two deep? I would say, says Cat 5, corner with Xavier Lucas, OJ Frederique, Ethan O'Connor, and Damari Brown. By the way, Damari Brown is someone else who has been practicing well. I don't want us to forget about him. I know he missed a lot of time last year due to injury. Damari is making his case to get a lot of playing time this year. Good physical corner. All right, so in addition to what you said, corner, and yeah, I agree. Miami has turned an area that was a weakness last year into what looks like a strength with all the depth that they have at cornerback. I would present to you the edge rusher rotation. It's in really good shape because behind Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor, you've got players like Hayden Lowe, true freshman at 255 pounds, who moves the needle every single day. Marquise Lightfoot, who's up to around close to 230, and Lightfoot has been practicing really well. I think he can get into the rotation this year. Malik Bryant, Cole McConaughey, Armando Blunt, Herbert Scroggins, who we talked about. I think Miami's blessed with a very deep edge rusher rotation, so I have to put that up there. I talked earlier about tight end Alex Bowman looking good in practices. Miami's got a very good two deep, if not deeper, there with Elijah Lofton, Alex Bowman, a couple of the young guys there. Luka Gilbert is practicing really well. So is Brock Schott. And Brock, you talk about a freaks list, that dude Schott is a true freshman, has already set the tight end squat record at Miami with 560 pounds. Think about all the great, strong tight ends Miami has had over the years. Brock Schott is already setting weight room records there. And then, when you talk about depth, you have to talk about running back. Mark Fletcher, Jordan Lyle, Shamar Brown. You're at least three deep. And I also don't want to forget the other guys. Gerard Pringle had some good moments in practice today. Chris Wheatley-Humphrey, I think, can be an important player with his speed, and he's also adding more physicality, getting a little bit bigger. So those are some of the deepest position groups. We get this one from our guy Steven C, who says, hey, what do you think are our best and worst position groups? It's like putting the labels like best and worst. I guess you could go deepest and less deep is the way that I would put it. I already talked about what I think are the deepest position groups. In terms of less deep areas with something to prove, we talked about safety, right? You've got a lot to prove there. Zechariah Poyser looks like a starter. He transferred in from Jacksonville State, so his level of football now in the Power Four goes way up. Jacoby Thomas, who does have a proven level of football having played in the SEC, but Dylan Day, who's a young guy trying to grab a spot. Markeith Williams, who continues to practice pretty well, but that's a less proven area at safety. We want to see some other guys emerge and really up that level. Defensive tackle, we've talked about it. We've seen and heard encouraging signs of like the fourth and fifth guys starting to step up and take ownership, like Artavius Jones and Dante Simpson, the true freshman. Also, Dalen Russell was getting some good reps today. But you know who your top three are: Justin Scott. And by the way, Justin Scott, I don't want you guys to think that I don't think he's a riser because I didn't talk about him in the first segment. Justin Scott is getting praise. And, when we talked last night, we had James Brockermeyer starting center on the show. And one of the guys he mentioned gives him a difficult time in practice is Justin Scott. Ahmad Moten is another one. And David Blay, that's like kind of your top three, but we need the depth behind them to really prove it. Right? A defensive tackle. So that's an area that seems to have a little less depth. And, there's a lot to prove at receiver. So Miami lost, their top four wideouts from last year. So there's like this power vacuum that's been left that needs to be filled. by a combination of homegrown guys and transfers. So I've been encouraged with what I've seen from the receivers, but we actually need to see that group step up because you've got a very good, accomplished starting quarterback that reportedly Miami paid a lot of money for when it comes to NIL, if you believe all the reports out there. So you need to maximize his experience, right? Keep him protected with your very deep offensive line, which is another group. Alex Mirabal said it earlier in the week that he thinks he's got 8-9 guys on his O-line that would all be starters in other programs. So the offensive line is definitely probably the best and maybe the deepest position group out there. So you want to keep your quarterback protected, and you also want to give him the weapons to succeed this year. Now, on that offensive line, one of Miami's standouts has been named to Bruce Feldman's Freaks list. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new Locked On Canes. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. Make sure you also check out the portal. Our very good friend Brian Smith of Locked On Seminoles and the Portal podcast. On the portal, he takes you through everything going on in recruiting, transfer portal, of course, NIL. Brian is actually going to be joining me on today's episode of Locked On ACC, which is coming out later, free wherever you get your podcasts and free on YouTube. Bruce Feldman, who, he wrote one of the greatest novels of all time, Cane Mutiny. If you haven't read that book, it was all about Miami's rise in the 80s through, 2001. It was basically, it wasn't like written by the same people, but it was like the book version of Billy Corben's The U documentary. Like Cane Mutiny is an awesome book if you haven't read it. And Bruce Feldman, he puts Sisi Mauigoa on his annual freaks list. He says the former 5-star has started all 26 games at right tackle that he's played at Miami since arriving 2 years ago. Last season, Mauigoa earned all ACC second team honors. By the way, folks, he's better be on the first team this year. 6'6", 335-pounder clocked a 1.57 flying 10-yard split. His power output registered almost 10,000 watts, which is by far the most on the team, almost 1,000 watts more than the next player. Last year, Mauigoa measured at 9,274 watts. His max velocity is 18 miles per hour, and his vertical jump is 30.5 inches. So Sisi makes the Freaks team. I was a little disappointed that Miami only gets one on his Freaks team because, like, Virginia Tech had a couple different guys. A few other teams had multiple guys. By the way, spoiler alert, Jeremiah Smith was the number one Freak on the list. If I'm going to think of another Miami player that could have made the Freaks list, and I don't know what his gigawatts are. Like, Feldman gets very technical with some of these scientific measurements. Like, I don't know how many liters he drinks or, whatever these analytics are, but I've got to think Elijah Lofton can get a spot on this Freaks list. A guy who can play just about every position, a guy who provides such a unique skill set. Like, I would describe Elijah Lofton, if you're game planning against him as an opposing defensive coordinator, that's someone who's going to keep you up at night. So I would think about him as a Freak. I would think, just based on his pure size and the agility that he's able to complement that with, Markel Bell. I mean, doesn't it take a freakish athlete to be 6'9" and move the way that he does? Because there's nothing lumbering or unathletic or no lack of agility in Markel Bell. I mean, we talk about the great reps that he and Ruben Bain have against one another in practice, and to be able to have the grace and the awareness to deal with that Ruben Bain bull rush, that you're more than just a big body. So I would think Elijah Lofton and Markel Bell are players who could show up on that Freaks list. And I think for future Freaks lists, a guy I'm going to watch out for next year, the year after that, would be Hayden Lowe. If you've seen Hayden, whether you've seen him in person or you've seen the photos of him come up from these early practices, I mean, you're talking about a kid who just turned, a kid, he's a man now, but he just turned 18, who has that 255-pound, 6'4" frame coming out of high school. Coming out of high school, he's already that developed. Hayden Lowe, I think, is someone who, Yeah, I don't know what his weight room stats are and, how many gigawatts he's benching or whatever, but I would think Hayden Lowe is someone who's going to turn up on future freaks lists, and hopefully he shows a little bit of that this coming season. I want to thank you everydayers so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. Make sure you smash that like button, hit the thumbs up button if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe. If you're listening to the audio version, which I think is great because you can take us with you wherever you go, on a jog, take us in the car, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.